Warning: the following program may contain material not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
The borders of space and time have opened once again, and transmitting from the mountains of West Virginia, it's time once again for Let's Find Out with Diego. The universe is waiting for you. Wake up and remember.
On this episode of Let's Find Out, our guest is a national and internationally known writer, author, and authority on the occult and folklore. His career in all fields of the paranormal and the supernatural has spanned over 55 plus years. He is a spiritual research and demonology consultant, a cryptid and UFOlogy investigative researcher. He's also a retired law enforcement officer, an ordained minister, doctor of metaphysics, and a certified paranormal investigator. All this plus more. Please welcome our good friend, Dr. Dennis Carroll. Dr. Carroll, welcome back to Let's Find Out.
Yes, sir. Well, it's good to be back. How have you been doing?
Pretty good. Busy. Kind of like you, doing the rounds. We're doing the interviews, and we're studying up for what I think is one of the most interesting episodes I've done in a very long time. I've never touched on the topic of Jack the Ripper because there are so many theories out there, and it's one of those things. Just when one person says they got it figured out, you got 10 more people saying no, not so fast, and we start all over again. So you're very experienced in that. But before we start, because I'm very interested in something, and you brought it up during the pre-interview. And as I said, man, you read my mind. Let's talk about, because I don't think we did it last year when I had you on the show, your law enforcement career. Because being an officer, you see an awful lot of things. You see people who are monsters. You see actual monsters. I don't know what shift you were working. It could have been a night shift, day shift. But you see some of the worst of the worst and some of the best of the best. But interesting enough, you brought up something about a special kind of training that officers receive. So let's go back in time when you were an officer. What was going on then?
Okay, well, I was a uniform officer and was on the patrol, but I did work a few times with the detectives and all that on other things. But I've always had a fascination with criminology. It is an interesting field in itself. And when I was younger, I remember very well following very closely the Charles Manson case out of California. That was fascinating, and I'm going to mention a little bit more about him later. But criminology is very interesting, and it also often overlaps my other interest in the paranormal, supernatural, and demonology that I've been involved with now well over half a century. And I've even had a couple of cases where it definitely overlapped, but we were required then, because there had been a lot of that going on in the early 70s and late 80s and stuff like that, of what we term ritualistic murder. And it goes deep into the aspects of the occult and a lot of the covens, and there are different types of covens. I'm going to mention that right quick. There are actually like satanic covens, and then there are witch covens, and then there are vampire covens, and some even say werewolf covens. Okay, we're not going to get into that today, but anyway, that is an interesting aspect. You have so many different supposedly type of covens and all that. And I remember one very interesting case that took place not that many years back of a ritualistic killing that took place in Mexico. There was, I think it was involved about 6 or 7 different victims at one time. So it was not only the work of serial killers, but it was also a ritualistic thing. And so we were required, definitely as police officers, to take courses on this. Learn, but not only the ritualistic part, but also the satanic thing that was going on, because it's all linked up. I mean, it's all in there together. And when you look at certain criminal cases like Jack the Ripper, to me, it's very obvious that, and there's some very other ones like Jack the Ripper, like the Valencia murder, the axe murders. You have also the Axeman of New Orleans, which was a very interesting. I've done a lot of research on that. These are serial killers that all have something in common. It's very ritualistic way they do things, and it's almost, and I got to say this, downright satanic the way they approach these things, especially like the Axeman of New Orleans, which is interesting. And it was not, and by the way, the Axeman murders took place not very long after the Ripper murders. It's not that far-fetched that the same person couldn't have done it. I'm saying he did, but you have to wonder about that sometimes because of the methods they use. But anyway, getting back to Jack the Ripper, the interesting aspect of that is the ritualistic part of it. And when I first started, and I've always been for many, many years now, I've been interested in this case, as a lot of people have. You have so-called experts on it who have turned it inside out, upside down, whichever way you can look at it. And they all come out with different theories of who it is and all that. I wasn't concerned that much with actually who it was, but what really fascinated me was how it was done. And maybe why it was done. That's the interesting thing. And when you think about, my friend, when you think about serial killers, there's something you need to really, truly consider about these. And I've met a couple of them, not the big names, but they were killers in their own right. You have human evil, okay, in this world. And you see a lot of that today going on, people treating other people very badly. You have a lot of hatred in the world, more so today than we've seen in a long time, and being acted out on the streets. This is human evil. But then you go a step further, you run into what I call inhuman evil. It is a darkness behind the darkness, the shadow behind that darkness of human evil. And when you look into the eyes of these people, there's nothing there. I mean, it's like the cold dead eye of a shark. There's no emotion to it. I talked to one guy one time. It was a case that they had, and I was with them when they locked this guy up. What he did was he actually killed his girlfriend, cut her in pieces, put her in a freezer, then went home, took a shower, took a nap. And I asked him later on, I said, why did you do this? Why did you, did you get mad at her for something? Did you get angry? You have something, what happened here? And he said, you know what? I don't know. I really don't know why I did it. But he had no emotion. He didn't feel like there was no guilt there at all in that statement.
And that's where the darkest aspect might come into play. Let me ask you this, my friend. When we're talking about ritual killings, we're talking about the occult here in the United States. I agree with you in the fact that even like 60s, 70s, and 80s were kind of like the, I want to say the peak of it, but you hear about it more then. Not so much in today's time. Let me reframe the question. Because
that was the days of Satanic Panic. Remember that? Satanic Panic?
Right. Yes, the music scene in movies. So it seemed like a lot of the kind of things was always attributed to every other country but the United States. But it did happen here. Would we be surprised how much of that's been going on here?
Absolutely. But on a lower scale and a more localized thing. It wasn't, some very big sensational thing. A lot of this took place, and that's the interesting thing about law enforcement back in those days. It's more connected now, I came in on the end of that. You've got a lot of agencies correlating together now more than they ever did before. But once upon a time, it was very localized, especially in the 70s and 80s. Okay. It was more or less, it was right after 9/11 and all that, that happened, 9/11 and all. So, to me, it's a whole different ballgame now with law enforcement. And of course, with the technology that has revolutionized all of that. And even AI now is beginning to get deep into that. AI now, you can feed into AI and it will recreate faces that are amazing, And I would like to see somebody who knows how to do it That's not me. I'm not that familiar with AI that much. But someone who knows AI could really feed in some of this stuff of Jack the Ripper case and see what AI comes out with on that. The quantum computers think about it. But you might see something. But when you look at the case, those patterns jump out at you. That's the way that I was taught, and I was taught myself over the years. When you go into deep investigative research, you look for the correlation, you look for connection, you look for patterns. That's what you look for, because that points you to clues. And when you look at murders like the Ripper murders, you see a pattern that begins to form. And there's a reason why it's doing that. You have to understand there's some human ingenuity behind that that's doing it that way. And that's the thing that happens with ritual murders. Now having known a lot about demonology and all that, I understand that in these cults and a lot of these things they do a lot of these dark, evil things to acquire power from their demonic sources that they want to. And that's what a ritual is all about. A ritual, sort of what you do, horrific things that you do to get a certain amount of power and cooperation from the darkness that's in this world. Now, there's two kind of darknesses, and we got to consider whether you're a moral person or religious person or whatever. There's two, you got to consider these two. There is a inhuman darkness in this world that is greater than the human darkness, but when those two link up together, that's when things happen. And that's what rituals are for, supposedly. To form that link.
And you said it perfectly, because now let's go back in time to the late 1800s, which is where they say this case took place. I'm one of the mind, and like I said earlier, I admit I'm not an expert, but the first things I thought about, the more and more I heard about this, I thought of either maybe one person could be doing this, a copycat, or a cult. It could be different people committing the same crimes the same ways in a ritualistic type pattern. And let me add this, because the last time I actually kept up with this is long before I was married. I was dating this nice lady a long time ago, and she was really into an author called Patricia Cornwell. And at that time, I believe she released a book that says "Case Solved, I Got It." And she's a British painter called Walter Sickert, and I'm going to butcher the last name, that was the killer.
Yeah, Sickert, yeah.
And but with that came more controversy, because we're also talking about letters that were also sent during that time. Some people say they were real letters or they were hoax letters. We will never know, but it was easier back then to get away with crimes, I believe. But it's, as you said, the type of crime and the way it was set up, the ritualistic way these women were murdered. In your opinion, do you think it possible that it was just one person, or could it have been multiple?
There are two avenues of thought on that. That it could have been one man, or he could have had an accomplice. Okay. Because some of these women before the murders were seen with more than one man. And there were I think there was one instance, it might have been Catherine Endowes, that was seen with two men at the same time, at the same time. But that was many hours before she was actually murdered. So there could have been, another interaction after that. Now, let me lay this out for you. We're talking about Victorian London here, in the Whitechapel district, which was very notorious, along with the Spitalfields. You can go there today. It is a completely different world, okay, than what it was then in the late 18th. As a matter of fact, my only link to Jack the Ripper is that my grandmother was a little baby when he was going around doing this, okay. And it's not been that long ago, but things have really changed in that respect. And you can still go there and take Ripper murder tours, and they will show you where these things happen. And I've got a ghost story for you at the end of this that ties into this that I'll tell everybody about. But anyway, the interesting thing is that my favorite. There's so many. It's like the movie Casablanca. You got to round up the usual suspects here, and you've got a lot of suspects, and like Sickert, and even the author Lewis Carroll was thought at one time, who was thought to be a suspect because he was into anagrams and he had an unusual fondness for children and all that. So but they was ruled out very quickly, I think. But and then there's the thought that the Ripper could have been a woman, because there was a woman that was very suspect. I can't remember her name, but she actually, and this is how savagely she killed somebody. And this is in the same district now. Okay. She actually found out her husband had gotten another woman pregnant. She killed her husband, killed that woman, and cut the baby out of that woman. Went to prison for. I think she hanged for it. But anyway, they would hang you very quickly back in the day. So that was one of the forms of corporal punishment. But anyway, she was suspect, and I don't think she was, in my own opinion, was that much of a suspect. But you're outreaching, trying to pull all this in, trying to figure out who and his what. My favorite all-time suspect is Kaminsky. I think his name was Aaron Kaminsky. He was a Jewish, Polish Jewish fellow who was, by the way, a butcher. And back in the old days, I don't know if your listeners are aware of this, but they would not let 3 people serve on a jury. They would not let these 3 people serve on a jury because they felt that these people had no feeling for other people. And that was a doctor, a mortician, and a butcher. You didn't put them on a jury, so they got ruled out on it. And of course, law enforcement. You didn't have law enforcement on a jury. But anyway, a butcher knew his job too. He knew his way around, but more so around the body of a cow or sheep than he did a person. A doctor would know more. And so I have to, but the interesting thing about Kominsky, he was a barber too. Now, barbers back in the day were almost like what? Surgeons. They could, take a growth off of you. They could I'm talking about minor surgery, but they knew their way around the body pretty much. So that, gave Kominsky a little bit of a red flag for me. He is still buried in London, by the way. But here's the most interesting thing about him. He would wander Whitechapel, and he would wander the Spitalfield area, all that's connected. And this is the low-life place of London. These were the low dregs. People were constantly, it was either full of prostitution, gambling, drinking, opium dens, the whole works. It was just the worst place you could go, okay? Bad things were bound to happen there, no matter what, which way you looked at it. And it was especially very vulnerable for these women because they were plying their trade in the alleys and the doorways and the dark alley, dark ways that went through these little buildings. They were like buildings were so crowded together. You had little dark yards that went from one place to another, like alleys. So they were plying their trade. They were what I call them victims of opportunity. This was where he could work good with this, And I'm going to talk about the last supposed case. There were other cases. Some speculate he may have done away with as many as 12 to 15 people in that area. But only 5 are actually attributed to him because of the way, and here's the interesting aspect, of the way he treated the bodies and the way he cut their throats. Now, I'm not going to get too graphic for you, okay, in this because it is very graphic. But let me just say, he didn't just, barely cut your throat. He really bore down on it very hard to the point where it would cut down. I don't know if you can realize, it would cut through the throat, almost cut the bone in the back of the neck. That is very, very much either a lot of anger behind it or a lot of strength. Almost inhuman-like strength to do that with a knife. Okay, we're used to Hollywood. You see people cut people's heads off so easy. Like cutting butter with a knife. It's not that way in real life, folks. Okay, it takes strength to do these things, especially to cut somebody's head off. And 3 of these women almost were decapitated. I think Catherine Endiles was the one I think he got interrupted on. She was out in a yard very close to a bar, to the door, a very well-frequented bar. She was in a yard, and a guy drove up in a dog cart. And he opened it, and he saw something lying on the ground over there on the sidewalk, like, you know, and their sidewalks back in the day were not cement, they were planks. And he saw something like that. What is that? Like a bundle of rags or something. And he you know, pulled the cart up and he tied the horse up and he walked over there and he saw it was a woman. And he said her blood was flowing down the sidewalk and into, you know, a puddle. And he felt her and she was still warm. So he didn't do anything to this woman. Then he went on later that night and did what he wanted to another woman. So it was a double murder that night because he didn't get finished first. So that tells me he wasn't out just to kill someone. There was something else attached to it that he had to do. And we'll get into that in a minute. But anyway, most interesting thing about it was I believe he interrupted him. Oh, and he didn't know it, but he was probably in the yard at that very time, at that moment with Jack the Ripper. He was probably hiding in the shadows back over there because he immediately, when he found this woman, he went in the bars and told his wife. His wife worked there. And, hey, there's a woman dead out here in the yard, you know, and everybody came out. That gave him time to get away. And he went on to perform another murder that night. And he had more time with this murder. But I want to think about something when you look at this. Here this man is doing this stuff in the dark. You know, it was not well lighted. There were not a lot of street lights around. They had gas lamps, but they weren't that far flung and in between, okay? You didn't have a lot of electrical lighting, okay? And he was doing these things in the dark. And when I tell you about what he was doing here, you're going to have to wonder, how did he do that? It is almost inhuman. But that's why it leads me to believe maybe was there an inhuman source to this? Because he was doing things a normal human being, and I'm talking about even an abnormal human being could not do in some aspects. And that was the interesting part. That's what stood out to me. But the different and there were several murders after these series of murders called the torso murders. You may have heard about those. That was where they took the arms and the legs and the head and left the torso. That's ritualistic too, by the way. But when I tell you what he did to these people, you will see what I mean by the aspect of the ritualistic thing they do. Now, let me say this, and nothing knowing a lot about the occult. A woman is considered not just sexually in a coven or occultic practices. A woman is considered a portal, okay? Because she gives birth. She brings life into the world. She's considered a portal, all right? And what he was doing to these women was destroying that portal, okay? And in rituals, even in rituals of occult rituals as you do on these things, a woman is spread out like a star pattern. Got the head, the arms, the legs, and she's completely spread eagle. And it looks like it forms a star pattern. Okay. This is done usually on an altar. And having seen actual real black mass, okay, I can tell you about some of this stuff. But believe me, you don't want to know a lot about it. This is stuff of nightmares, my friends. We don't want to get too deep into it. But anyway, the things that they do, the rituals are very nasty stuff, definitely, and very evil thing, very dark and evil stuff. But that's what she is. She forms a star, and a certain part of her, shall we say, female anatomy is the portal of the center of this star, okay? And that's where the ritualistic part of this comes in at. This is the way they would find, now here's the interesting part, this is the way they would find these women spread out like that. And he would either cut their vagina out or he would cut their uterus out. He would take the piece of the kidney out. Supposedly, he sent a piece of, I forget which one's kidney to the newspaper office with a letter and said, this is a part of a kidney. I ate the other half and it was delicious. And also a part of an earlobe that actually came from the victim. So we know without doubt that was probably a real Ripper letter. The other ones are suspect, like the Dear Boss letter and From Hell, which is that famous movie was made about. That's where he got his title. The there is one absolute letter we could say probably pretty sure that he did write it. Okay. The other ones may have been planted just to get newspaper circulation going. That's suspect on that. But anyway, that's another part of the ritualistic killings and murders. They actually devour part of the person. Okay. This is getting a lot of primitive tribes believe this, that if you eat a part of your victim, you take upon yourself some of their power, their life power. Okay, that's what that's all about. I'm not going to get deep into that for you, but anyway, that's where that's going at. That's psychologically what's going on here with that. And but when it comes to the female, she is a portal. Okay, and he was either had a very virile hatred of women, or he was doing some type of a ritual here. And I feel like laying them out in that star pattern was a definite sign of that. But that last killing that he did of Mary Kelly in that room, he had all the time in the world, had plenty of light to do what he wanted to do. And he engaged in a bloodbath that was very demonical. I mean, we'll talk about that in a minute. But anyway, can you imagine doing this, though, in the dark with no light? He didn't have a flashlight he could turn on or anything, you know what I'm saying? In the dark doing this, he had to absolutely know almost beyond human knowledge of what I don't even know surgeons that could do that in the dark.
Right. And let me ask you this. I'm really sorry to interrupt. Let's go into the part of the ritual killing part and the way they were laid out, the way he did the murders. I'm one of the thought, and this might just be Hollywood, and sometimes Hollywood gets it wrong 100% of the time, and they do. When there's a ritualistic killing, and I'm talking about females, and I don't want to upset the ladies out there, so I'm going to be very careful what I have to say. Normally, it is assumed that if a sacrifice is going to be performed, it would have to be a virgin. Okay.
That is usually children that are that's where you get that at. They have, if a female child is a virgin, and they will actually rape and kill the child before they actually do that. What it is they taking away of innocence, and then it is desecrating, and then it is murder. It is following a certain pattern doing that. But this is done, unfortunately, and that's a very dark aspect of a lot of this stuff, that there are child sacrifices for this kind of thing. And that's where the virgin thing, it's never usually what we would call, it'd be more adolescent than, older, a woman. But now a murder ritual like that doesn't matter whether they're virgin or not. What you're doing is taking life. That's the main thing. And you're opening this portal. That's what he was doing to these women. He was opening like a portal, okay? But he was desecrating that portal while he was opening it. He would leave them open body-wise, okay? That's part of a ritual. When you open a human being in sacrificial ritual, that's what you usually do, especially if it's a woman. A lot of men are not ritually murdered this way. Mostly women are, but men can be done this way too. But I'm just saying mostly women because they represent a portal. Okay. That's what they're all about. The man, if a man is sacrificed or a male child is sacrificed, they will desecrate them too. They can, they will rape and desecrate them too and do what they want to, just like they do a female. But there is a different ritual with a man than it is in some ways with a woman, because of this, okay? Because she's a female, unfortunately. But the interesting thing about this is there's supposed to be a very demonic dynamic to this. This is what in dark witchcraft and in Satanism, in order for you to climb the ladder to obtain power that you want, and that's just to obtain different types of power over other people's minds, or what we call the power of glamour, which is not glamour, but putting makeup on, okay? This is another kind of glamour that actually messes with people's minds and gets them to see what you want them to see. Vampires are supposed to be able to do this as well. You acquire different powers. You can have the power of invisibility. You can have the power of shape-shifting. You can have different powers. The further up the ladder you go, the more horrific things you have to do. To enter the portal into dark witchcraft, you must murder a sibling, a sister or brother, and also deliver your own blood into this. And according to the DNA they collected off of one of the victims of her scarf, you might have remember that very well, and that pointed to Kaminsky, by the way, because his DNA was supposedly found on that scarf as well. Now, there's another thought that they say that there has been certain blood samples found on the Ripper victims that did not belong to the Ripper victims. And he may have cut himself somehow or another. It was part of a ritual, and that is part of a ritual. That's another thing. It's another red flag here. What's going on with that? Because all of these rituals, my friend, require your blood too. Every time you do it, you got to spill your own blood. And also somebody else's as well. It's required. And the more you do that, the more evil, darker torture and stuff that you can engage in, the further up that ladder you supposedly can go. And the more power you get. And the power to become rich or the power, glamorous or whatever you want, you're out to get. Okay. And I warn people about this because this type of power, and it is real. This stuff is real. I'll tell a lot of folks, this is not just something that, we write books about. We're dealing with a real subject here, without a doubt. And being a minister, I know that there is a spiritual side, and a doctor of metaphysics. I know there's a spiritual side to this universe, okay? And what we're looking at is a very, very dark, evil side of this universe. But it has its power, and I call it, this demonic power is like plugging your toaster in every morning to make you some toast. You got to plug your thing into a power source, and that's what these people are doing. They're plugging into a power source when they're doing these rituals. And you've heard a lot of people talk about these rituals that are done as supposedly in entertainment nowadays, making you part of the ritual. When you observe it, even observing it puts you in the ritual. The ritual uses you just by even watching. That's why I warn people about these things. Even on TikTok, you got this stuff going on. You better be careful what you let in the portals of your mind and your soul and all this stuff, because whatever dark spiritual stuff is out there, it can affect you spiritually without you even knowing it sometimes. And that's the interesting aspect of it. But I'll leave that for another show sometime. But anyway, the interesting thing is when you do these rituals, you're getting something back out of it. And here's the interesting theory I'm going to throw on you now. Okay. And a lot of people think there have been different Ripper murders over the years in different places in different centuries. Okay. That are very similar. They may not follow the exact same modus operandi, but it is still very similar to the point where you got to say, that looks like a pattern kind of a thing going on. But there have been some in Paris. There have been some, I think it was in Berlin. There were some. There have been some in New York. The list goes on and on over the years. And some people have tried to stick it to a certain space, those years, like every 25 years or every 20 years. I don't see that as a pattern, but I still see this cropping up that way. So here's the big theory on that. Okay. What if this is not, like a lot of serial killers and stuff like that, it's not really human in its concept? What if this is inhuman? What if this is some kind of demonic force using this ritual? And demons like rituals too, by the way, because it enables them to have power, especially over other people. Okay. We do know that these things can possess people. I've been involved in exorcisms. Okay. I've seen with my own eyes demons. I know that they exist. They are real. They are a real force in this universe. Okay. For very bad purposes. They are real, and they can possess people. There are even certain witches, so-called witches, that can possess people. Their spirit can be put out into animals or into people. Some people call them, skinwalkers. Mm-hmm. you got this stuff going on, and it's all based on ritualistic magic. Ritualistic and blood magic. So you've got different types of magic that combine together to do this stuff. Okay. You got natural magic, or earth magic, as some people call it, elemental magic. You have blood magic that goes into it. You have demonic magic. You got different aspects of this that all tie in together to do this. Okay. But even demons like the rituals, because that gives them power. That gives them a what? A portal in which to operate, a portal into our side of this universe, our physical universe, okay? And they can appear physically in this universe, but they can possess people as well, supposedly. And when they possess someone, that person may still, okay, let's say, take for instance, if you were demon possessed, you're still in there. But now you're no longer behind the wheel of your car. You're no longer driving. You got somebody else is in control. Okay, you're still in there. Yeah. You're not gone. No, you're still there. But somebody else is in control. And what if this is going on with Jack the Ripper murders? Huh? What if this demon is going from century to century, person to person, getting people to do these things to empower it? Its darker aspects of evil. That's been a theory a lot of people, my own self, I've wondered about, because that's not impossible. Knowing what I know, it's not impossible to think about. And when you look at something like what he was doing with these women and doing it in the dark, almost inhuman, it's inhuman the way he was doing it. Like I said, number one suspect for me is Aaron Kaminsky, because he was Wonder Whitechapel, and there was something definitely mentally wrong with this guy. Because he would tell people, he would act really weird. He would go talk to a wall. He would be talking, even on long conversations with a wall in an alley. People would see him, and then some days he would act okay. He could do his job, but then he would have these episodes. And here's the interesting thing about these episodes: when he had them, he could never remember what he did. It has amnesia. And here's one more thing. I got to tell you this, just to throw it out before I hand it back to you here. The interesting thing is, the demonic loves mental illness. It can work with it. It can get behind it and use it very much. And I've seen it happen many times. And that was a prime candidate for me right there, was Kaminsky.
And you just reminded me of a conversation I had with somebody the other day about demons or evil spirits capitalizing on people who are having mental issues or some sort of I don't want to use the technical terms because I'm no doctor, but I know they take advantage of people like that and get them to do terrible things, not only to others but to themselves. And touching back with something that you said, we're talking about every so often. You mentioned something about we're gonna look at 20 years, let's just say, kind of like the Halley's Comet. Every 75 years, a spirit of some sort requires someone to do something for them in order for them to gain power. Because I look at it like this: the demon eventually gets hungry and it wants to eat again, whatever that is. What, in your opinion, what is there something atmospheric about this? Is there a portal that opens every once in a while? Are we the cycles, the stars? What is it about this force that's almost on a timer, and these killings almost seem to marry each other?
That's a good theory about that, because a lot of witchcraft, and I'm talking about dark witchcraft. Now, I want to stipulate something here. Witchcraft is not a religious belief, okay? It is a profession, okay? A lot of people get that mixed up. They think that's a religion. No, witchcraft's not a religion. Anybody can practice it. You can be a Catholic and practice witchcraft, okay? No, it's a profession. Now, there is a religion attached to it, which is, paganistic, religion, but it's not that. But anyway, it is, a lot of it is tied into celestial mechanics, if you want to call it that. A lot of astrology and astronomy go into that. But there's been a lot of speculation over the years at certain times of the solar eclipses and lunar eclipses and all these other things. Things certainly doesn't happen, but I don't think it's tied directly, completely to the celestial objects like planets and all that stuff, the alignments and stuff. There may be some, that there is some ritualistic stuff that is tied to that. There are certain rituals that have to be done under certain circumstances to make them that. That is a definite tie into that. But as for Jack the Ripper and the demon that I think that maybe is doing this, I don't think it's tied to that certain aspect of it. It could be. It depending on what kind. I would love to tag and know exactly what kind of a ritual is being performed here and why is it being performed. But he was desecrating these bodies because he would, cut the pieces and parts out. Especially the portal that makes her a woman, the aspect portal part of this, he was attacking that. And that's why women become high priestesses in these. They are revered as the portal that these spirits can work through. I have actually attended voodoo ceremonies, the real thing, not the tourist thing, but the real thing. And I have seen them let demon spirits enter them. They open themselves up to this. And most of the time, it's women that it does this with because a woman is the portal that they're seeking entrance into this world through. That's why most mediums are women. Okay, a lot of men are, though. I'm not throwing out on the guys here. But it's very prevalent that women do this more than men. That's just the way it goes. And, of course, we know back through time and history that, the priests of Diana and Hecate and all this, they were all women. It was the portal thing because they have a mystical part in life and in the universe to fulfill. And that's, I think, a reason why they seek this out. But getting back to the demon aspect of it, demons, I don't think it doesn't matter to them what time of the day it is or what planets are in motion, whatever they want to do. And if this guy is a bloodthirsty demon, I think the only pattern you can attach to that is that in certain times of the history, when hatred is more prevalent, when there's war going on, when there's some upheaval in society going on, I think the demonic increases in power, definitely, without a doubt. And the more is done, more darkness. The darker the world becomes, the more prevalent they become. And a lot of these Ripper murders took place during wars. At that time, I think the Boer War was going on when this happened in Whitechapel, or right before the Boer War, somewhere in that area. I'm not that big on that history, but it was something like that. So you had different, there's always a war going on, by the way, anyway, somewhere, most of the time. And so you got a lot of this stuff. And the demonic, without a doubt, is drawn like iron to a magnet when it comes to dying and death, and places like Whitechapel where people were dying, being found dead in doorways, dying in opium dens. I mean, it was a dark spiritual place. No wonder he was drawn to that. That's where they are. They go to places of the dead and dark spiritual areas and battlefields and mental hospitals and all this other stuff. I did a show one time not long ago on the America channel with the Ghost Asylum crew. I don't know if you remember that show, but they went to a mental hospital, and I told them, I said, hey, you're going to get attacked big time there because that's a very demonic draw there, and sure enough, that's what happened there. And I advised them what to do to, guard themselves against that. But this is the places that they frequent. I worked at a hospital for many, many years. That was one of the most haunted places I ever was around. So that's what you will find there. And I have a lot of people, over the years tell me, the ghost hunters, and I've done a lot of that in the past. Oh, let's all go to the graveyard and find some ghosts. I said, the only thing you're going to find there are demons. That's where they hang out. That's their hangout. But getting back to Jack the Ripper, the interesting aspect of this, if this is what's happening with this whole case and all the connections to it, whoever done that, I'm going to say this had sort of an inhuman authorization going on here in order to do what he was doing. Okay. And like we said about serial killers, like Bundy and all the rest of them, they have that association with this great darkness in the world, that other inhuman darkness. And I think it activates, emboldens, and makes more powerful the human darkness that's in all of us. Okay. There's an old saying that inside everybody lurks a murderer. Under the right circumstances, they can get out. That animal in us is always waiting to get out if we're not careful. And when you have another outside darkness that hooks up with that, things are going to happen. Bad things are going to happen. But some people don't need that, like Hitler. He probably didn't need that, but if there was anybody ever that was demonically possessed, that man definitely was. But here's the weird thing about demonic possession. I've studied for many, many years, and a lot of cases of demonology, deep into demonology, and it's a fascinating subject. It affects us all in one way or another, whether we realize it or not. There are certain levels of possession. There's one I called UDDI, under direct demonic influence. I didn't say possession, influence. You can have this and not know it. I think this happens with a lot of people that go in places and shoot places up, kill people indiscriminately. And then later on, like that guy I told you about before the show, I don't know why I did that, I don't know why I did that. There's a lot of people that you hear that time after time after time. I don't know why I did that. Because maybe you didn't. Maybe, you were part of it, but there was something behind you, motivating you to do that, and you didn't want to. Here's the thing about the demons, my friend. We got to understand. Spiritually, no demon can kill you. Let me repeat that again for you. You cannot be killed by a demon. Murdered by a demon. Let's put it that way. You cannot be murdered by a demon. I think there is a spiritual law, a line drawn in the sand that tells these demonic forces, you can't cross that line. You can't kill people, but they get around that like lawyers in a courtroom. And I've seen a lot of lawyers in work. You can get around that by having people do it for you. So you're not guilty, you're getting the people. That's where possession and influence, oppression comes in, and obsession. Obsession is a demonical thing too, by the way. You see somebody, a man or woman, you love, I got to have that person. All of a sudden you become obsessed with something like that, whether it's a person or gambling or whatever your, forte is. It gets a hold of you. It grabs your soul and does these things to you. And I think it wouldn't even start with murder, especially on something like Jack the Ripper, somebody like that. And like I said, there have been a series of these, and you have to begin to wonder, what's going on in the background on this, And by the way, the Ripper, about 3 years after the Ripper murders stopped, Kominsky died. But up until that time, right directly after the Ripper murders, he was institutionalized, and they stopped.
That's very interesting. Now, do you think that law enforcement back then maybe purposely protected this person or a series of people with these killings, or did they really not know?
I think what was going on, I think higher up in Scotland Yard, and Scotland Yard was supposed to be the premier law enforcement agency in the world at that time, Only one second only was, I think, New York. And they were very inept in some of this stuff. There was a clue written on a wall in the alley, and he had him wash it off. And he mentioned something about Jews, but it was spelled wrong and all this stuff on purpose. You could tell this whoever wrote that knew what they were doing. Why did he get them to do that? Aberline was very strange about it. He was the one that was in charge of the whole thing. Was very strange. I believe, and I think I know what Aberline's motivation was. I think that he believed that Prince Clarence, the grandson of Queen Victoria, was the culprit. I think he suspicioned, whether he was or not, I think he believed he was. And he thought he was doing the crown a favor by covering some of this stuff up. That's a possibility, He could have thought he was doing the right thing by, messing around with stuff he shouldn't have been. But he did it. This Clarence, this Duke Clarence, I think it was the Duke. He was a very interesting suspect because he had gonorrhea, and gonorrhea and syphilis eventually messes with your mind. And he was known to frequent prostitutes, and that was, of course, the perfect place to find them, Whitechapel. He probably definitely was messing around there when he shouldn't have been. And that was the Queen's, son and all that. So you got to wonder about that. You got to wonder if maybe he thought, maybe I'm doing her a favor. I'm doing the Queen a favor, and I'm going to cover up, kind of push this down the carpet a little bit. I kind of think that might be what was going on with him. But as for the rest of them, they were very inept. And I'm very surprised at how they did. Of course, law enforcement was not that good in that day anyway. I mean, they didn't even up at that time know what fingerprints were that much. I mean,
Right, because I'm thinking that when these cops back then, or detectives, if they had detectives back then, I'm not really sure.
But here's the interesting thing, my friend. Of all the DNA in the world, why was Kaminsky's on that show? Look at the odds on that. Think about it. That was kind of conclusive to me. But here's the only problem with that. The DNA is still a very quirky science here, But why did he come up with that? I mean, that's just too much of a coincidence. I do not believe in coincidences myself. I did, but not evil.
Right. But, perhaps also with that, maybe some of these people who showed up to the crime scene, they might have contaminated the scene because back then they wouldn't know how to quarantine an area. So maybe that's another reason why they couldn't put the puzzle pieces together. But, I'm leaning towards what you're saying.
Well, I think another reason why he might have had that clue washed off because it mentioned Jews, and that was a Jewish section that was back in there, and he didn't want to maybe get things started, but that was stupid to do. Somebody thankfully wrote that down, and we do know what was said. But there could have been some very, interesting clues in the very way it was written. I would have loved to have seen it, and I could see that if it was, maybe something there that was stupid. And that was very inept. And that was very surprising with Scotland Yard to me, for them to do that. And it was almost, I'm just going to say, downright, convenient. You know what I mean?
Maybe convenient. But I think we know the purpose. Let me liken this to something in current times. And I'm not going to say names because I don't need people knocking on my door. So you had this big thing that came out of the guy who killed himself in prison but didn't kill himself in prison. And there's these files. He had a certain island where many people used to visit, right? And the information has been slow to nothing to trickle out with these files. Because maybe, I don't know who, if they release the information.
We got to remember in this world there's a lot of darkness going on and human and inhuman, okay? And it's all together like that. And there are men out there who will definitely, the darkness has one precept. It must operate a lot of times in darkness. It has to operate in secrecy. And if you threaten that secrecy, you're in bad trouble, okay? I have actually been in areas where I said, hey, something, is going on here. I don't want to hang around. I could tell I was being watched. I said, hey, you don't want to hang around these places because they guard these places. They guard their secrecy well. Just like the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan. Why did they wear hoods? Okay. They didn't want their identities known. And look at Skull and Bones and some of these other organizations that are, tied directly into presidents. These people are hiding something and they're guarding things. Their very reputations are online here. Their very dynasties that they have. And when you come to somebody like this guy that supposedly hanged himself in there, you got to wonder about that, how conveniently the camera went off and how some convenient things happen. And you got to say, that's that old saying where there's smoke, there's definitely some fire burning somewhere. And there were certain very powerful people that were involved in this. That's when you got to be very careful. at what you're looking at, because power, that's what I was going to say about this darkness, demonic or human or both. And when they both get together, it's even worse. Okay. The one thing about this is it is the most addictive thing on this planet. Forget heroin, forget fentanyl. This dark power addicts you more than anything else. And you will do anything, no matter what it is, to retain that power under any circumstances.
Yeah, and this is we're on the same train tracks here, because I was gonna also say that nobody wants to release this information because it would upset the power structure. And who knows who or what industry would collapse if this information were to come out.
Yeah. Or what people would be exposed. And I think the power that this guy had was he knew too much. You know what I'm saying? He could do what, if I were going to be a very powerful person, I would get knowledge of all the people around me. I'd buddy up with you, be friends with you, know your secrets, find out your weaknesses, and then I would exploit them if I wanted power over you. And that's what was going on with this guy. I believe that was his number one motive, why he was buddying up with everybody. He wasn't a friendly, he was all about himself, okay? He wasn't concerned about anybody else. But I think his motivation was absolutely to blackmail people, without doubt, and then get something on them. And say, I know something about you, because I think he tried it with some of, we know 7 people he tried it with. It didn't work. But he did that. And I think that was the motivation behind that guy. And that would have been the motivation to take him out.
Yeah. And that perfectly makes sense, which I said I was linking it to talking about the Jack the Ripper case. And when you're talking about and I forgot the name of the gentleman that we believe it was Kaninsky, right? You said Kaninsky? Did I say it right?
Yeah, he's just my prime suspect. There may be others, like Sickert. Sickert was very interesting. And Holmes, that's another one, and he was in New York too, by the way. He had a torture place of his own in New York. There's some other interesting ones that fit the bill too, but that to me said, spoke volumes when they came up and said, his DNA showed up on that. He could have been a client of hers, though. That's the interesting aspect. If he was a client, maybe he left some DNA. Okay, that's just the way that goes. They were applying their trade in doorways and alleys and all that way. So, but it's interesting, though. It's interesting. And he had already had a reputation in Whitechapel, and people were kind of scared of him. There he is again, messing around, talking, having conversations with walls and light posts. He was a I would say, very valid candidate for it. Absolutely. And I've actually seen his grave, and you got to wonder, you got to wonder that, because it's like I said at the beginning of this, you round up the usual suspects, and whoever one stands out the most is the one you got to look at. But if there was an inhuman power behind this, if it was tied into it, and by the way, Kaminsky, as far as I can know, what I could find out about him, and records are not very good, was not, as far as I could tell, I can't say 100% sure, but was not involved in things like, I don't think, a coven or cult. It's a possibility. But what if he, having a mental illness, you're kind of subject to these things too. So I'm not saying everybody is, okay? But some people will sort of open doorways for this. That's the thing about the demonic. You've got to open the doorway to them. They just can't come in for any reason. You have to open the doorway some way spiritually in your life to allow these things in. And I think Kaminsky also had a alcohol problem. So the doors were there, definitely, for this to happen. So you have to wonder. But, and it's like, I mentioned Charles Manson. The Manson case was very interesting. As far as we know, Manson never actually physically killed anyone. Think about that. Well, he's the biggest serial killer in the world, but he never killed anybody. But he did say he didn't. He admitted to killing some people. We can't prove it, though. Okay. But he actually had people go. He had a demonic influence about him. He could get people to do it for him. Okay. And that's the way demons work. Okay. They absolutely do that. And I will always remember what he said before they took him off to begin serving his lifelong. They were going to execute him, but that law changed while he was there, so they put him away for life. But he had said something very interesting when they were taking him out of the courtroom. He turned back to the DA and he said, "You know what? You may lock me up for the rest of my life, but my spirit will walk your streets every night."
And possibility that was not just him talking. It was something else.
Absolutely. I believe it. Knowing what I know, that was somebody else talking there, but talking to him. And we got to remember, like I mentioned earlier, the UDDI, under direct demonic influence, is very subtle in how it works. You can have this influence around you by certain ways, things that you do, certain lifestyle you have. Even certain family curses and bloodlines have this influence definitely in there. And it's not full-blown possession. It's not the Hollywood, Linda Blair with a head floating around and spitting up grease. It's not that, okay? I've seen real demonic possession, and it doesn't go that dramatic, folks, okay? But I have seen people levitate. It does happen. But there can be a degree of it that can be so subtle that you'll not know it until it activates you. It's like being a sleeper cell. Remember the old stories about sleeper spies that they call them on the phone and they give them a word and suddenly that's it, And that's kind of like what I'm talking about here, but it's already in you, sitting there waiting for something, certain circumstances to take place or certain actions that take place. You got a problem. Definitely got a problem, a demonic problem going on. But usually, and I have a lot of people ask me this question over here. Said, "Dr. Carroll, can I be possessed? Can I be walking down the street and bam, I get possessed?" I said, "No, it don't work in it. It doesn't work that way. Actually, you're giving more power to the devil than God has, okay? It doesn't work that way. You got to open the doors spiritually, and you do that with addiction. You do it by certain lifestyles. You can do it and a lot of drug use and witchcraft, by the way, is connected with this. You open the doorways, you lower the barriers, and they can come in. These things can come in, and if certain things you do or certain obsessions that you have, certain people that you hang out with, it just depends, So we got to be very, very careful with the doors in our lives and the doorways and what we allow in them. I even tell people you don't even want to be touched by certain people. I've had a lot of that, talk about that. I think we have a spiritual barrier like around us. Even animals have it. There's sort of a safeguard. And once you let something inside there, you're open season duck, okay? I mean, it can get you. So we have to be very, very careful. And if there is something like that out there in the world, it would not surprise me without it. I don't see how there couldn't be something like this Jack the Ripper's spirit. That's the only name I can give it. That's going from place to place, doing these things, motivating Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy or Ed Gein or whatever the situation is. We need to be very wary of that. And of the people around us. If people start acting strange, we need to investigate that. We need to find out what's going on with that person, okay? Especially if they have some mental problems. Now, mental problems are just like any other sickness. You can have a bad knee or a bad back, or you can have a mental problem. I mean, that's no problem with that. But these people are open season for that because the demonic loves that. They can work with it. It's something they can work with. It's like clay, They can work with it, and they will go for it. I'm going to tell you the one thing about demons that I've learned over the years, and I've met a lot more than I care to meet, okay? But I will tell you this about demons. They are opportunists. All they want is an opportunity, and they will never pass one up.
No, and it's one of those things with demons that it scares me because it seems that with the rise of popularity of paranormal and supernatural television shows, and you see them all come and go. but there are a lot of them out there that are actually their purpose is to actually conjure up these things. That's a very dangerous game.
Well, I've thought that. I've had a lot of people come to me over the years, especially young people. Oh, tell me more about demons, demons. I want to know more about. I said, look, you're taking this the wrong way. Mm-hmm. You need to approach it scholarly. You can do that, but you don't want to be obsessed with this. You don't want. It almost empowers them when you do that. That's why in demonology, there's number one rule of demonology: we do not speak the names of demons. Okay, that gets their attention. There's an old saying, speak of the devil and he will appear.
Yeah, because, if you call on somebody by name, they're say, hey, who's calling? Let me see who this is. And I don't make light of that, but it's a very dangerous game I've seen out there and I've seen them also on some of these groups on YouTube. And I don't quite agree with some of their tactics, but, who am I to say? I'm not out there doing it, but they should be very, very careful.
Yeah, that's true. And there's one more thing I want to mention about the Ripper case, and that was what happened with Mary Kelly in that room. He completely obliterated her body in that room. There was blood on the walls. There was not a whole lot left of Mary Kelly because he had plenty of time to do what he wanted to. And he had light and all that. It was very interesting. And the guy that day, she had evidently brought him, she was plying the tray and brought him back to her she had like a one room thing there. And the next day, she was owed the rent, and he went to her house to get the rent, And he knocked on the door, nobody came to the door, and said there was a window there, one window. And the window pane, of course, was broken out, and there was like a curtain hanging over, and he kind of just pulled the curtain aside and looked in the room. And when he did, he went screaming down the alleyway and got somebody back because that room was a bloodbath. Now, let me tell you the one thing I come away with that last, so-called last victim of the Ripper was the very aspect of that murder was downright demonic. A human might enjoy himself a while, get tired, and leave. But to see something like that, that was demonic without a doubt. In its conception, he even skinned this woman. Okay, he obliterated this woman. There was nothing that much. They said that they took her out in sacks.
Awful. I couldn't.
So that tells me there that what you're dealing with, is definitely inhuman in many aspects.
Yeah. Now, I think, unless these pictures are not real, I've seen pictures, I think, of that very scene that were taken back then, or drawings, and pretty gross, man. So let me ask you this. So what is, in our modern times, what is the closest murderer compared to Jack the Ripper? Is there one that comes in mind that comes close?
Well, Holmes was very much like that. Holmes in New York, he had the torture house, torture building, but he was into torture more than murder. Okay, but that is part of the ritual thing too, though. By the way, and there's a lot of talk about him being, I think his name was J.J. Holmes or something like that. He had maybe some connections to some covens in New York. They're talk about that. But I tell you, the one that really comes close to my mind to think that something that's very demonical like Jack the Ripper would have to be Ed Gein. He was definitely a victim of demonic obsession with the dead. He took his own mother up and brought her back. He was sort of the prototype for Psycho and all that went on with that. He dug his mother up. He would go back and dig other people up, make lampshades out of them. Come on. This is very, very, very obsessed, very demonic obsession type thing going on. But like the Axeman of New Orleans was very interesting, and along with the Valencia axe murder, whoever he was, he sat up in the attic all night long, smoking cigarettes before we went down and murdered a whole family. That we know of. We don't know who it was. There are some suspects in that too. And here's the interesting thing about that and the Axeman. There's a link. The same railroad line that happened on runs through New Orleans as well. And it's been speculated that maybe he could have, been like a hobo or something. He could have rode a rail to Valencia. But anyway, the Axeman is very interesting because he was very methodical. He would always chisel a panel out of the door and come in through the door. Back in those days, the old wooden doors had like 4 panels, thick 4 panels, and he would chisel. He would just sit there and chisel his panel out and then get in the house. And then he would walk, and they said he would walk around the house and he would watch people sleeping. He was empowered by his very secrecy. It was almost as if he was wanting them to wake up. And he would sit there and walk around, watch them sleeping, and then he would go look for an axe. Everybody had an axe back in the day because you had to chop firewood, He would go find the axe and then do what he wanted to do. And he would hack them to death in their beds without it waking them up, And he did this to, I think, about 5 or 6 families. They were mostly in the Italian section of New Orleans, and there was speculation that they were mafia hits, but mafia doesn't work that way. This guy was a definite serial killer, and there was only one person that lived through this. Yet he did not kill them; they lived, and they said, later on, I never saw him. And when they said, "What do you mean you didn't see us?" They said, "No, I only saw the axe."
Oh my goodness, that is terrifying. Could have been anything.
He wrote letters too, though. That's the interesting thing. He wrote letters to the New Orleans PD too. And he named himself, the Axeman. And he said, I'm from the hottest part of hell. I'm a demon from hell, and all this stuff. And he said, I'm going to pass over your city tomorrow night, and if I don't hear the jazz music playing, I'm going to kill somebody. That night, everybody was playing jazz music in their houses. They didn't want to visit from the Axeman, but he disappeared too and went into history, just like Jack the Ripper.
I think might be similar spirit, a similar demon, perhaps in the works in these 2 individuals. Now, I know that we're getting close to the end of the show, and you've written books in the past. Are you looking to write another book? Are you working on anything currently?
Yeah, I'm working on the next one called, the name of it is Cryptidology, Hunting Monsters and Things of Nightmare. I've, very interested in the cryptid part of the paranormal world, and now the cryptid and the paranormal has sort of combined together. That's why I came up with the term paracryptidology. You're looking for things like skinwalkers, witches, and all these other things as part of the cryptid, so-called cryptid. Cryptidology, once upon a time, was mostly unknown animals or mythical type monster things. But like I said, I'm going to have on the back of the book a blurb that says, when you're a child, you believe in monsters, and then you grow up to find out that they really are real. And sometimes they are us.
100% accurate. And I know you're also busy with your YouTube channel and your vodcast as well. And for the listeners...
my YouTube channel is Hunting the Shadows. And I do a couple of podcasts a week. I do one show, of course, called Hunting the Shadows. And the other show is on Friday nights. It's called Paranormal Point of View. We talk about books, stuff like that. And also I'm busy with my website. I have a website, DennisWCarroll.com. And I also do a lot of paranormal consultation. I have a lot of people call me with their problems. I've, done a lot of demonology stuff all over the world. And people call me with their problems or just, to ask questions or whatever. So I'm available through the website if anybody wants to contact me. It's DennisWCarroll.com. And I've got, several books for sale on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. You can look up the author, Dennis W. Carroll. I had to put the W in there. There's another Dennis Carroll, But he's a football player in Australia. I don't play football.
Of course. And for those out there, I will put the links on the show description once the episode is released. And Dr. Carroll, it's been a pleasure having you on. It's always a learning experience. And if you don't mind, I know you're a very busy man. I'd like to bring you back later this year because I think that
Oh, sure.
I'm thinking of a subject, and I'll surprise you. I'll get a hold of you and say, hey, let's bring you for this subject. And I know it's going to be another learning experience. So thank you so much for being on the show, and I'll see you later this year.
Copyright Diego the Podcaster. All content for Let's Find Out is the property of Diego the Podcaster and is served directly from our servers with no modification, redirects, or rehosting. All celebrity impersonators are paid performers. The impersonated celebrities do not endorse or promote any views or opinions expressed by our guests, Diego the Podcaster, or Let's Find Out. The information shared on Let's Find Out with Diego is provided on an as-is basis, with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.